Joining me now is the expert on local diners, Larry Cultrera. Tell me your backstory, like what led you to write about diners?
Well, the writing was way down the road from my initial interest, so to speak. I was interested in diners from the time I was a little kid, probably 4 or 5 years old. My dad actually told me about diners and that they were prefabricated restaurants. They looked somewhat like railroad cars, but they were not railroad cars or converted railroad cars. And so I knew this from a young age, and I was very observant when I went on rides in and around the greater Boston area, and I noticed all the diners that we had at that time in the late 50s, early 60s. And of course, as time went on, they started to disappear. And by around 1980, I was getting into photography. I started photographing diners as a documentation type of a thing. And in the process, 36 years later, I've photographed over 860 diners.
Wow.
I started writing a regular column for the Society for Commercial Archaeology, a national organization dealing with roadside businesses and attractions and whatnot. And I wrote the first ever regular column called Diner Hotline for them for around 18 years. I retired that in 2007 and started my blog right after that, which is called Diner Hotline as well. And the books came about because of the blog, actually.
So actually, Larry writes for the same publishing house that I do, which is History Press, now Arcadia.
Yes.
And our original commissioning editors were the same, Jeff Saraceno.
Yes.
So he wrote his first book, Classic Diners in Massachusetts, is what led me to the publisher. So I was like, I love that cover. I saw it at the Rosebud Diner in Somerville, and I'm like, I have to work with this publishing house. So thank you for writing that initial book. So we focus on Malden. So I know you grew up in Medford.
Right.
What's your experience with the Malden diners?
Well, my first real experience with Malden diners was not until I started photographing Viv's Diner on Eastern Avenue in Malden, which is now known as the Lunchbox.
Oh, okay.
That was my first diner experience, though I do recall the Miss Malden Diner on Main Street near the Sacred Hearts Church. And, like I said, I noticed a lot of them. And in doing my research, I found out there were, of course, other diners in the city of Malden.
So speaking of the Miss Malden, we have an archival photo that I have not seen before that Larry brought into the studio, and I think it's fantastic, this old school photo. So tell us a little bit about the Miss Malden in this photo here.
Well, Miss Malden Diner was I believe it was a 1940s vintage Worcester lunch car.
Wow.
And it was situated on Main Street, just past the Sacred Hearts Church. In fact, right next to the old Saugus Branch Railroad tracks that crossed Main Street. In fact, in that photo, you will see the trolley coming up Main Street, and the trolley tracks are actually crossing the railroad tracks right at that point where the trolley is coming. And the Miss Malden is sitting just behind it. It was a barrel roof Worcester lunch car, bright red as I recall. Unfortunately, it's the only picture that exists, and believe the diner itself disappeared sometime in the 70s.
And you also mentioned the lunchbox, and
Yes.
the lunchbox is, what was it called before?
Well, it was many names over the years. It was originally owned by somebody named McDermott. It could have been Al McDermott out of Fall River. He had many diners. And it was built in 1932, delivered to Wareham. But it may not have stayed in Wareham longer than 6-7 years. And it was originally built with a counter and stools like a normal diner, lengthwise. And in about 1937 or so, the Worcester Lunch Car Company, which built the diner, reconfigured it to be more of a lunch wagon with a serving counter down one end with a kitchen behind it.
Wow.
And then stools along the windows and a large, almost like community table in the middle. So it was kind of a unique experience for a normal diner. It wasn't set up as a normal diner. And this one here, when I first went to it, it was called Viv's Diner in the 1980s. And it eventually had other names like Rose's Little Red Diner. It was called Lulu's in the early 2000s, and then it became the Lunchbox Diner, which it is today.
So when I mentioned that we were bringing on an expert on diners to the show, people were like, they lit up. What is it about diners that people love?
Well, diners basically are, a democratic type of a place. Any good breakfast and lunch place around here in, eastern Massachusetts or just central New England in general, diners are more known for breakfast and lunch. You go down to New York or Connecticut, there may be 24-hour places. But up here, it's mostly breakfast and lunch. And Malden has the one diner, the Lunchbox Diner, but there's other breakfast and lunch places around that people call home, basically, or second home. It's a local place to shoot the breeze and have a cup of coffee, talk politics, talk whatever you want to talk about. Hopefully not argue, but anyways, there's a sense of community. A trash collector could be sitting next to the mayor. You just don't know. That's the way a good diner, a good breakfast and lunch place should be.
The people that, when I mentioned it, they mentioned the Linden Diner, and that wasn't like an old school diner.
No, that is what we call on-site. That's a storefront, just like the Doo-Wop Diner on Main Street, just past where the Miss Malden used to be, the Doo-Wop Diner is today. And back in the 80s, that was known as Steve's Diner. Those are what we call on-site. They aren't what a classic diner looks like generally. But the food, the ambiance can be diner-like, and that's what they go for. And, there's Robert's Broken Yoke down on Broadway, Franny's in Maplewood Square. There's all these breakfast and lunch places. The Donut Villa over in Highland Avenue at the shopping center, they're good breakfast and lunch place too.
So if you have not checked out Larry Cultrera's book, Classic Diners in Massachusetts,
yes.
And it's also the new one as well, the
New Hampshire Diners, Classic Granite State Eateries, yes.
Fantastic books, and they go back historically, a lot of historic photos and a lot of recent photos as well. So thank you so much, Larry, for your time.
Okay.
Thank you.